He slammed the wedding ring onto the marble table so hard the sound cracked through the bedroom like a gunshot. Claire flinched, not because of the ring, because of what came next. Dominic Valliere turned from the window, this man who had not smiled once during their entire ceremony, who had shaken hands with 200 guests, but had not once looked at his own bride. And he walked toward her with the slow, deliberate calm of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the gray threading through his dark hair, close enough to smell the bourbon he hadn't touched all night. "I need you to understand something," he said. "Not tomorrow, now." Claire stood in her wedding dress, 31 years old, hands folded in front of her, back straight, and she waited. This marriage is a contract. It protects your family's debt and consolidates two business interests. That is all it is. You will have a home, security, and my name. He paused. You will not have me. He pointed at the sofa against the far wall. And you will never, under any circumstance, touch me. If you had told Claire Winslow 6 months ago that she would spend her wedding night on a stranger's sofa while her husband slept 4 feet away behind a closed door, she would have laughed. She was not the kind of woman things like this happened to. But here she was. And here's the part that will stay with you. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She looked at the sofa, looked back at him, and said, quietly, without a single tremor in her voice, "Thank you for telling me the truth." Then she asked him where the extra blankets were kept. That was the moment Dominic Valliere, a man who had ordered grown men out of rooms with a single look, first felt something he couldn't immediately identify. It would take him months to realize it was the beginning of the end of everything he thought protected him. If you've ever been in a room with someone and felt, without explanation, that they were the most dangerous person present, not because of what they might do to you, but because of what they might make you feel, then you already understand what happened next. Stay with this story. Hit that like button if a strong woman's quiet dignity has ever taken your breath away. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because I promise you, nothing about this ends the way you expect. Now let's go back to where it actually started. 3 months before the wedding, Claire Winslow was standing in a hospital hallway at 11:30 at night, talking a security guard out of firing a 22-year-old intern who had accidentally broken a visitor policy to sneak his grandmother an extra blanket. That was the kind of person she was. She wasn't rich. She wasn't connected. Her father, Thomas Winslow, had built a mid-sized medical supply company on 40 years of careful work and one catastrophically bad loan. The kind that sounded reasonable in a conference room and becomes a slow drowning when the market shifts. By the time Claire understood the full depth of what her father owed, the number had grown past anything the company could absorb. The creditor was a holding company called Valliere Capital. She didn't know, when she first walked into that building on Fifth Avenue, that the man she was about to negotiate with had more influence over the financial landscape of New York than most elected officials. She had done her research, of course. She knew Dominic Valliere was 44, widowed, privately educated, and almost entirely absent from social media. She knew his company controlled 11 subsidiaries and held debt positions in over 30 firms. She knew he had a reputation for efficiency that people described in the way they described weather events. Not personal, just inevitable. What she didn't know was that he had already decided before she sat down that she wasn't going to get what she came for. She got it anyway. Not all of it, but enough. She negotiated 40 minutes past what his assistant had scheduled, kept her voice level when he questioned her father's decisions with a bluntness that bordered on cruelty, and walked out with a 6-month payment extension and a restructured interest rate. She was in the elevator before her hands started shaking. Dominic watched her leave through the glass wall of his conference room and said nothing for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called his attorney. "The Winslow girl," he said. "What do you know about her personally?" He would spend 2 weeks telling himself it was strategic, business, nothing else. It wasn't nothing else. The marriage proposal, which was not a proposal so much as an arrangement delivered through intermediaries, that landed on Thomas Winslow's desk on a Thursday. His daughter found him at the kitchen table that evening, the papers in front of him, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, his face wearing an expression she had never seen on it before. He looked ashamed. "Dad." She sat across from him. "Tell me," he told her. She read the papers 3 times. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling and breathed through her nose for a long moment. "He wants to marry me," she said flatly. It was not a question. It clears the debt entirely. The company survives. The employees, 37 people, Claire, people who have worked for me for decades. I understand, Dad. You don't have to. I know. She folded her hands on the table. I'm not saying yes because I have to. I'm saying yes because it's the right thing. She paused. But I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this as a sacrifice. I'm doing this as a decision. Those are different. Thomas Winslow looked at his daughter across the kitchen table and felt, for the first time in 40 years, that she was the stronger of the two of them. He was right. The wedding itself was exactly what Claire had expected. Expensive, well-organized, and hollow. 200 people she barely knew toasted a marriage that most of them understood to be political. She smiled because she was good at smiling, danced one obligatory dance with her new husband, his hand on her waist with the clinical detachment of someone handling a document, and spent most of the reception talking to a 73-year-old housekeeper named Margaret, who had served the Valier estate for 26 years and had warm, watchful eyes that missed nothing. He wasn't always like this, Margaret said at one point, quietly, not explaining what she meant. Claire didn't ask her to explain. She had learned, early, that the most important things people told you were always half said. After the last guest left, after the last photographer packed his equipment, after the estate fell into the specific silence that follows an event designed to be witnessed, a member of the house staff escorted Claire to the master bedroom. She had 30 minutes alone before Dominic arrived. She used them to sit on the edge of the enormous bed, in her wedding dress, and think clearly about what she was doing. Not to panic, not to grieve, just to locate herself honestly inside the situation. She was married to a man who did not love her and had never claimed to. She was in a house she didn't know, full of people she hadn't met, in a city that would now define her daily life. She had no close friends within reach. Her father was an hour away. And the man who would sleep in the same room tonight had looked at her, across their entire wedding, exactly 3 times. She cataloged these facts the way you catalog weather before a long drive. Not to be frightened by them, just to know what she was driving into. When Dominic came in, she was still sitting on the edge of the bed, hands in her lap, posture easy. Whatever he had expected to find, tears, demands, nervous conversation, her stillness clearly wasn't it. Something moved across his face too quickly to name. He set down his jacket, loosened his tie, then turned and delivered his terms. She heard him out completely. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look away. When he finished, when the words, "You will never touch me," had settled into the air between them, she was quiet for a moment. Not wounded quiet, thinking quiet. "Thank you," she said, "for being clear." He waited for the rest of it. The hurt, the anger, the negotiation. "Where are the extra blankets?" He blinked, just once. "The closet," he said, pointing. "Left side." "Good night, Dominic." She crossed the room, pulled a blanket from the closet, a plain wool one, not the decorative one, dragged it to the sofa, folded it once, and lay down with her back to him. He stood in the center of the room for several seconds without moving. Then he went to bed. Claire lay in the dark and listened to the estate settle around her. Pipes, wind somewhere, a floorboard 2 rooms away. She had grown up in a house full of sounds, and she was good at sleeping through unfamiliar ones, but she didn't sleep for a long time. Not because she was frightened, because she was thinking. She was thinking about what Margaret had said. He wasn't always like this. She was thinking about the way Dominic had watched the door close behind the last guests, a fraction of a second where his face had done something unguarded before the composure returned. She was thinking that a man who builds walls that high has, somewhere underneath them, something he is working very hard to protect. She was not, she told herself clearly, going to be the person who tears walls down uninvited. She had not come here to save anyone. She had come here to keep her word and build a life inside whatever space was given to her. But she was also, and she knew this about herself, someone who left doors open. She fell asleep around 2 in the morning. She woke up at 4 because she heard voices below. Muffled, exhausted, the sound of people still working. She lay still for a moment, then sat up. Dominic's side of the bed was still, his breathing slow and even. She took her blanket, folded it, and set it on the end of the sofa. Then she slipped out of the room in her bare feet. The reception hall was still half dismantled. 4 members of the catering staff, tired, young, working by the light of the service entrance, were stacking chairs and breaking down tables. One of them, a boy who looked barely 20, was moving too slowly, his face pale, his eyes red. Claire found out, within 5 minutes of quiet conversation, that he had been on shift for 19 hours, that he'd broken a decorative tray worth more than his weekly pay, and that his supervisor had already told him he'd be fired in the morning. She spent the next 2 hours helping them stack chairs. She also made very sure, before she went back upstairs, to speak with the night manager and explain, calmly and with the specific authority of someone who now technically owned half of this estate, that the tray had been broken in the course of doing his job under unsafe conditions, and that she expected no further disciplinary action. The night manager looked at her. This woman in a silk robe, barefoot, her wedding night hair loose and slightly disheveled, speaking to him at 4 in the morning with absolute quiet certainty. And he nodded. The boy kept his job. Margaret saw all of it. She was awake because Margaret was always awake, in the way that people who love a household too much to fully leave it are always awake. She didn't say anything to Claire. But in the morning, when Dominic came down for breakfast and found Margaret at the kitchen table instead of the dining room, wearing the specific expression she reserved for things she felt he needed to understand, she told him what his new wife had done on her wedding night. He sat across from her without speaking for a long time. "She didn't sleep?" he finally asked. "A few hours. Upstairs." Margaret set down her coffee cup. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't ask for recognition. She just helped. And then she fixed what needed fixing. She paused. And then she went back to bed. Dominic looked out the window at the estate grounds, bare and gray in the November morning. "She didn't have to do that," he said. "No," Margaret agreed. "She didn't." He said nothing else. He finished his coffee and left for his office, and spent most of that day doing something he almost never did, thinking about a person other than himself. He thought about the way she'd said thank you for being clear. Not sarcastically, not bravely, just honestly. The way you thank a doctor for a difficult diagnosis, because honesty, even when it hurts, is a form of respect. He thought about the blanket, the plain wool one, not the decorative one. She had understood, without being told, which things in that room were actually meant to be used. That bothered him more than he could explain. That evening he came home to find the East Corridor, which had been empty and slightly depressing for 2 years, ever since the vase on the hall table had been broken and never replaced, now had a simple clay pot with a white chrysanthemum in it. Nothing fancy, nothing showy. Just, this space was noticed. This space matters. He walked past it twice before he went upstairs. Claire was in the library, a book open in her lap, her feet tucked under her on the armchair by the window. The one everyone always chose, and no one ever admitted was the best seat in the room. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "Good evening," she said. Not nervous, not performing. "The flower," he said. The hall looked like it was apologizing for something. She turned a page. "I thought it needed something that wasn't sorry." He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he needed to. "Dinner is at 7, he said. "I know, Margaret told me." He left. He went to his study and stood at his window for a while, looking at the grounds, feeling the very specific discomfort of a man who has constructed his entire life around knowing what to expect. He had expected a woman who would either break or scheme. He had not expected someone who simply inhabited, who made a chrysanthemum in a clay pot feel like a statement of intent. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and didn't drink them. Somewhere below him, he could hear the distant sound of Claire asking Margaret something about the kitchen, her voice easy, unhurried, interested, and Margaret's response carrying a warmth that surprised him. Margaret did not warm to people quickly. He stood at his window and felt the walls around his carefully constructed silence shift, just slightly, like the first barely audible crack in ice before it breaks. He did not acknowledge it, but it was there. The chrysanthemum was still there the next morning. Dominic noticed it again as he came down the stairs at 6:15, before anyone else in the house was moving. He noticed it the way you notice a stone in your shoe. Not painful exactly, but impossible to ignore. He walked past it without stopping. Then he stopped anyway, 3 steps beyond it, and stood there for a moment with his back to it before continuing to the kitchen. Margaret was already at the stove. She didn't look up. "She's been awake since 5, Margaret said, to the egg she was turning. "I didn't ask." "No, you didn't." He poured his coffee and stood at the counter and said nothing, and Margaret said nothing, and that particular silence between them, the one they'd been having variations of for 26 years, settled around them both like an old coat. He left without eating. The days that followed had a structure to them, and structure was something Dominic understood. He left early. He returned late. He ate at his desk more often than not, or at the long dining room table alone, working through papers while his food went cold beside him. The estate was large enough that 2 people could move through it for days and barely intersect, and he used that space deliberately, the way a man uses silence in a negotiation, not to be rude, but to avoid giving anything away. What he hadn't counted on was what Claire did with the space he left her. The first sign was the garden. Not all of it. The grounds were too large for one person to tackle alone, and she hadn't tried. But the south-facing terrace off the kitchen, which had been overgrown and ignored since the previous estate manager left 18 months ago, was cleared by the end of the first week. Not professionally landscaped. Cleared. The dead growth cut back, the beds turned, the paving stones scrubbed down to something that looked like intention. He found out from his driver, who mentioned it in passing. The second sign was the name thing. He had a staff of 14 at the estate. He knew their job titles. He knew their schedules because he managed them. He did not, if he was honest with himself, know most of their names from memory. Within 10 days of arriving, Claire knew every name, every family situation she'd been told, every dietary restriction, every birthday within the coming month. He discovered this when one of the kitchen staff, a woman named Rosario, who had worked the estate for 7 years and who Dominic was nearly certain had never once spoken to him voluntarily, came to his study door to say that Mrs. Valliere had gotten the birthday wrong on the card she'd left. The card. For Rosario's birthday. Which Claire had apparently left on the kitchen counter that morning before anyone else was up. Dominic looked at Rosario for a moment. "Is the date correct now?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Good." Rosario left. Dominic sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The third sign was harder to dismiss. He came home on a Thursday evening and heard piano music from the East Wing, the room that had housed his mother's old upright piano for the better part of a decade, and which everyone had silently agreed to leave alone. Not locked, just left alone. The way you leave certain rooms alone when you can't bring yourself to deal with what's in them. He walked toward the sound without deciding to. Through the half-open door, he could see Claire sitting at the piano bench, but she wasn't playing. An 11-year-old boy he recognized vaguely as the son of his groundskeeper was playing, slowly, haltingly, picking out a simple melody with his right hand while Claire sat beside him and pointed, occasionally, to the next key. They were talking quietly between the notes. He said something that made her laugh. A short, real laugh, not performed. And she said something back that made the boy sit up straighter and try the phrase again. Dominic stood in the hallway and watched through the gap in the door for longer than he meant to. Then he walked away before either of them saw him. That night at dinner, which they still took at the same table, in the same distant silence, though Margaret had taken to setting places that were slightly less far apart than the first week, Dominic put down his fork and said, without looking up from his plate, "That was my mother's piano." Claire looked at him. She didn't say anything. "She played every Sunday morning," he said. "For about an hour. She wasn't very good. She didn't care." A beat of silence. "I hope it's all right," Claire said, using the room. "It's fine." Another silence, longer. "What was her name?" Claire asked. He looked up then, and something moved across his face. Not pain exactly, but the near cousin of it, the thing you feel when someone asks a question that proves they've been paying attention. "Eleanor," he said. Claire nodded slowly. "That's a good name." He picked up his fork. He didn't say anything else. But he finished his dinner at the table that night instead of retreating to his study with the papers, and somewhere in the middle of the silence, Claire poured him the last of the wine. Not making a thing of it, not making eye contact, just refilling his glass the way you refill the glass of someone you've decided to take care of, whether they've asked for it or not. He noticed. He didn't say thank you, but he noticed. The first real crack came from outside. His Uncle Leon called on a Friday afternoon with the particular warmth in his voice that always meant he wanted something. Leon Valliere was 61, silver-haired, expensively dressed, and had spent 30 years operating in the peripheral vision of the family business, close enough to benefit, far enough to avoid accountability. He was charming at dinner parties and precise about money, specifically about money that wasn't his. I heard the new wife has been redecorating, Leon said. She hasn't been redecorating. Flowers in the hall, digging up the south terrace, piano lessons for the help's children. A pause calibrated for effect. People talk, Dominic. Then they're wasting their time. I only bring it up because the board meeting is in 3 weeks, and some of the partners are already asking questions about stability, about focus. Another pause. A distraction at home is a liability in the room. You know that. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Was there something specific you needed, Leon? Just checking in. Then we're done. He hung up and sat with the phone in his hand for a moment, jaw tight. Leon had been checking in on things that weren't his business for 30 years. And for 30 years, Dominic had absorbed it with the tolerance you extend to family when the cost of conflict outweighs the cost of endurance. The calculus was shifting, though. He could feel it. Leon's interest in the estate, in the business, in the specific details of Dominic's private life had been intensifying for 6 months in ways that were small enough to dismiss individually and significant when added up. He filed it. He went back to work. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing yet, was that Leon had already been in contact with 3 board members about a proposal he had not yet brought to Dominic, and that proposal involved the one thing in the entire estate Dominic would not have negotiated. That came later. What came first was the night he came home to find his wife standing in the kitchen at 10:15 at night, making soup. Not elaborate soup. The basic kind. The kind you make when you're tired and want something that feels like an honest effort without being a production. She had her back to the door and didn't hear him come in. He stood in the doorway and watched her stir the pot with one hand while holding a phone in the other, reading something, her lips moving slightly. He must have made a sound because she turned. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't know when you'd be back. I can make more if I'm not hungry." She looked at him for a moment. He looked rough, and he knew it. The meeting had gone 3 hours over, and he hadn't eaten since noon, and he was wearing the particular expression that Margaret called his empty building face, the one where the lights were on, and nothing else was. "Sit down," Claire said. "I said I'm not hungry." "I know what you said." She turned back to the stove. "Sit down anyway." He almost left. He had the intention formed and everything, the pivot of the body, the redirect toward the stairs. Instead, he pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. She put a bowl in front of him 8 minutes later. He ate it in silence. It was good, not spectacular, the kind of good that means someone paid attention to what they were doing. "Bad day?" she asked when he was most of the way through. "That's not a conversation I have." She looked at him across the table. "You mean you don't have it with people you don't trust?" He said nothing. "That's fine," she said. She wasn't wounded. She wasn't pushing. She was just accurately naming a thing. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I just thought you looked like you needed to eat something." He finished the bowl. She rinsed it when he was done. He watched her at the sink and felt, against every wall he had spent years building, a specific, quiet kind of anger, and it took him a full 10 seconds to understand what the anger was actually about. It was about the fact that he couldn't find a reason to hold her at arm's length. He had been waiting for it. The manipulation, the angling for access, the slow architectural project of making herself indispensable in order to extract something. He knew how that worked. He had watched it happen to powerful men his entire life. He was prepared for it. She kept refusing to do it. She wasn't building toward anything. She was just here, present, tending things the way you tend things that belong to you, not to leverage them, but because that is what tending means. And he had no protocol for that. He said goodnight. He went upstairs. He lay in the dark for a long time and listened to the sounds of Claire moving around below, unhurried, quiet. And then the house going still, and then her footsteps on the stairs and the soft sound of the bedroom door. She didn't look at him when she came in. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, came out, and lay down on the sofa with her blanket. "You don't have to sleep on the sofa," he said. Silence. "I'm not asking you to. The bed is—" He stopped. He was not a man who stuttered over sentences, and the experience of doing it now was mildly appalling. "It's a large bed." "I know," she said. I'm comfortable. He said nothing. Good night, Dominic. The following week, Margaret took him to the locked room. He hadn't planned to go. He had walked past that door for 11 years, and he had a system for it. The same system he had for certain memories and certain photographs and certain specific silences that came for him at 4 in the morning. You locate the thing, you acknowledge it briefly, you keep moving. Margaret knocked on his study door on a Sunday afternoon with the look she used when negotiation was not on the table. Come with me, she said. Margaret, I'm 68 years old and my knees hurt, and I'm asking you to come with me. He came. She led him down the east corridor to his mother's room, the one with the locked door, and produced a key from her apron pocket. He looked at the key. Where did you get that? Your mother gave it to me for when the time was right. She looked at him steadily. I think the time is right. She unlocked the door and pushed it open and stepped back. He hadn't been inside for 11 years. He expected dust, the particular quality of air in a room that has been sealed and forgotten, the specific grief of objects outlasting the people who used them. The room was clean, not recently cleaned, consistently cleaned. The surfaces were dust-free. There were white roses in a vase on the dresser, fresh enough that they had maybe 2 days left. The curtains were open to let in afternoon light. The armchair by the window, his mother's armchair, the one she'd read in every Sunday, had a small pillow adjusted on it, as if someone had just gotten up. He stood in the doorway and could not move. How long? He said. His voice came out wrong. Since the second week she was here, Margaret said from behind him. Every Sunday. She dusts everything, replaces the roses, and then she sits in the chair for a while. A pause. She told me she sits there so the room doesn't forget what it felt like to have someone in it. He walked in slowly. He touched the edge of the dresser. He looked at the roses. He picked up a framed photograph his mother had kept there. Himself at 12, squinting into summer sun, missing a front tooth, and put it down carefully. On the small table beside the armchair was a journal. Plain, cloth-covered, the kind you buy from a stationery shop without thinking too hard about it. He looked at it for a moment. He shouldn't read it. He knew that with complete clarity. He picked it up. He read for 20 minutes in that room while Margaret waited in the hall. Claire's handwriting was small and precise. Not what he'd expected. He'd expected it to be round, open, the handwriting of someone warm. It was controlled, with occasional places where the pen had pressed harder, where she'd been working something out. She didn't write about him much. She wrote about the room, about what it felt like to sit in the chair and imagine the kind of woman who had lived in a house that still held her shape. She wrote about a quality of stillness she found there that she didn't have language for. She wrote, in one entry that made him stand completely still, about a woman she had known briefly as a teenager, a woman she'd met volunteering at a hospital in Queens during the summer before her senior year of high school, who had been ill and very kind and who had talked to her about her son with such quiet pride that Claire had carried the specific texture of those conversations for 15 years without entirely knowing why. She had not yet made the connection. He had made it in the time it took to read that paragraph. His mother had been at St. Raphael's in Queens for 6 weeks in the summer before she died. The summer Claire would have been 17. He knew the volunteer program. His mother had talked about a girl who came to read to patients, a serious girl who asked good questions and had a laugh she seemed slightly embarrassed by. He sat down in his mother's armchair. He sat there for a long time. When he finally came back into the hall, Margaret was leaning against the wall with her arms folded, watching him with the patient certainty of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen for quite a while. She didn't know, he said. No. She still doesn't. No, Margaret said again. He looked at the wall. He looked at the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. She sat with my mother, he said. When my mother was dying, she was 17 years old and she went to a hospital and she sat with strangers. He stopped. And then she ended up here. Margaret said nothing. He didn't have a word for it. He was not a man who reached for words like fate or meant. They seemed imprecise, too convenient. But there was something about the specific shape of this coincidence that sat in his chest like a weight. What are you going to do? Margaret asked. I don't know. That might be the most honest thing you've said in 10 years. He looked at her. Don't push it, Margaret. I'm 68, she said again. I'll push what I like. He went to his study. He sat at his desk and looked at the surface of it. The neat, organized landscape of a man who controls his environment because he cannot control the thing that most needs controlling, which is the part of himself that knows what it's like to lose the one person who made the world feel like a reasonable place to be. His mother had died 11 years ago. He had been 33. He had closed that chapter with the particular ferocity of someone who has decided that grief is a structural weakness and rebuilt himself around its absence. He had done a good job. He was beginning to understand that good jobs have a shelf life. The board meeting notification came the following Monday. Standard agenda, standard attendees, and a late addition from Leon's office, a proposal to reclassify and liquidate the Eleanor Valliere Education Center, a nonprofit his mother had founded with her own money in 1998, on the grounds that it represented an unproductive asset on the foundation's balance sheet. Dominic read it twice. Then he called Leon. Leon answered on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting. "You want us in to explain this," Dominic said. "It's a business decision." Leon's voice was smooth, practiced. "The center operates at a consistent deficit. It has no revenue-generating function, and the building it occupies is worth $8 million on the current market. That money has productive uses. My mother built that center." "Your mother is not on the board, Dominic." A pause. "I know this is emotional. That's exactly why the board should be making this call instead of you." Dominic's jaw tightened. He was holding the phone with a controlled grip, the kind that looks like stillness but is the opposite of stillness inside. "The meeting is in 4 days," he said. "Correct. I've already briefed 3 board members. I expect we'll have enough votes to— Don't do anything else before I've reviewed the foundation documents." "Of course." Smooth, certain. "Take all the time you need." Leon hung up. Dominic sat with the dead phone in his hand and understood 2 things at once: that Leon had been moving toward this for months, and that Dominic, in his careful management of emotional distance, had not been watching closely enough. He pulled the foundation documents from his files. He spread them across his desk and began going through them with the focused attention of a man who already suspects he is missing something. He was right. He was also, as it happened, not the first person to look. He found Claire in the library at 9 that evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the good reading lamp pulled down beside her and papers spread around her in a pattern that looked chaotic but wasn't. She had a highlighter in her hand, yellow, the kind you can only half regret using on documents. And she was reading with the focused forward lean of someone who has found the thing they were looking for and is making sure they understand it completely before they say anything out loud. He stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" She looked up. She wasn't startled, which surprised him. "I overheard you on the phone," she said. She didn't apologize for it. "I wanted to see if I could help." "Those are private foundation documents. They were in the study filing cabinet, which you left open." She met his eyes. "I can put them back if you want, but I found something, and if I'm right, it changes everything, and I thought you should know before the meeting." He came into the room. He looked at the papers around her, then at her face. "Show me," he said. She picked up a document. Old, the paper gone slightly soft at the edges. The print the faded quality of something produced before everything went digital. "The 1999 amendment to the Foundation Charter," she said. "Your mother filed it herself. Most foundations allow asset liquidation with a majority board vote." She smoothed the page. "This one doesn't. She established an irrevocable trust protection clause. The education center is specifically named. It can't be sold, closed, or reclassified without a unanimous vote from the original board members, most of whom are no longer on the current board, and 3 of whom are dead." She paused. "Leon's vote count doesn't matter. The motion is legally invalid." The room was very quiet. "How did you find that?" Dominic said. "I cross-referenced the amendment index in the back of the charter folder. The amendment itself was filed separately, mislabeled, and stuck between 2 routine filings from 2001. She set the document down carefully. "It's been sitting in your filing cabinet for 23 years waiting for someone to look for it." He picked it up. He read it. He read it again. Then he set it down and looked at his wife, sitting cross-legged on his library floor surrounded by his family's legal history, highlighter in her hand, and felt something shift in his chest so completely that for a moment he wasn't sure where to put his hands. "Leon knows about this," he said. It wasn't a question. "He must," Claire said. which means either he missed it, which I doubt, or he filed the motion anyway, expecting nobody would check, expecting I wouldn't check. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He stood there in the library doorway, a man who had spent 11 years managing his grief with precision instruments, who had constructed his entire adult life around the certainty that he could not afford to need anyone, who had walked into a marriage with a set of rules designed to ensure that nothing and no one could reach him. And he looked at the woman on his floor who had, in 4 weeks, maintained his mother's memory, saved a stranger's job, taught a child to play piano, made him soup he didn't ask for, and just protected the last thing his mother had ever built. He said the only thing that was true. "Thank you, Claire." She looked up at him. She held his gaze for a beat, just one. And in it was something he recognized without wanting to, the particular quality of warmth that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. "You're welcome," she said, simply, without making it more than it was. He went back to his study. He sat at his desk and called his attorney and told him to prepare for an emergency challenge to the board motion. Then he put the phone down and sat in the silence of a man who is beginning to understand that the life he built to keep himself safe has, for some time now, been keeping him from something else entirely. 3 floors down, in the East Wing, the piano sat quiet in its room. In 4 days he would walk into that boardroom, present the amendment, watch Leon's composure come undone in real time in front of the full board, and preserve every brick of what his mother had built. But that night, the specific night that Claire sat on his library floor and gave him back what he hadn't known he was losing, that was the night the equation changed. And somewhere in the long quiet of that house, in the room where white roses were never allowed to go without replacing, the last wall he had built around himself developed a crack so deep and so complete that no amount of careful management was ever going to seal it. The board meeting was at 9 in the morning, and Dominic arrived at 8:40 with the 1999 amendment in a sealed folder and his attorney beside him. Leon was already there. He was standing at the head of the conference table with 2 of the board members Dominic recognized as his most reliable allies, talking in the low, easy register of a man who has already done the work and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. He was wearing a gray suit and his best expression, the one that looked like confidence and was actually calculation. And when Dominic walked in, Leon turned and smiled with every muscle except the ones around his eyes. "Dominic." He extended a hand. "Glad you could make it." Dominic shook it briefly. "Leon." He set the folder on the table. He didn't sit. He stood at his chair with one hand resting on the back of it and looked around the room at the 10 board members taking their seats and felt the specific weight of a morning that is about to go very differently than most people in it expect. The meeting opened. Leon presented his proposal with the polished efficiency of someone who has rehearsed it until it sounds spontaneous. He used phrases like fiscal responsibility and strategic reallocation, and sentimental attachment is not a balance sheet category. He had slides. 3 board members nodded at intervals in the way that means they have already decided. Dominic let him finish. Then he opened the folder. He walked the room through the 1999 amendment with the same quiet, methodical precision he brought to every high-stakes presentation. Not because he was performing calm, but because he had discovered, sometime in his 30s, that the most effective thing you can do to a man who expects you to be angry is to be completely, surgically composed. He laid the document in front of the board's legal counsel, pointed to the specific clause, and explained in 2 sentences why the motion before them was not just ill-advised but legally void. The room changed temperature. He watched Leon's face. Leon's face did something interesting. Not collapse, not exactly, but settle. The way a building settles when something load-bearing shifts. For exactly 4 seconds, the calculation behind his eyes was visible in a way it almost never was. And in those 4 seconds, Dominic saw with complete clarity that Leon had known about the amendment. He had filed the motion anyway. He had been betting that Dominic, in his grief-adjacent avoidance of everything connected to his mother, would not look closely enough to find it. He had been nearly right. "The motion is invalid," Dominic said to the full room. "We will not be discussing it further today." He looked at Leon. "My attorney will be in contact with yours about the procedural violations involved in bringing a motion you knew to be legally unenforceable to a full board vote." Leon said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious document." Dominic closed the folder. Meeting adjourned. He left without looking back. He was in the elevator before his hands, very slightly, started to shake. Not from fear, from the specific physiological response of a man who has been holding himself at absolute stillness for 90 minutes and is now, in private, allowing the adrenaline somewhere to go. He stood in the elevator and breathed. By the time he reached the lobby, he was still again. His attorney caught up with him on the sidewalk. "He'll push back," the attorney said. "Leon doesn't absorb a hit like that without a countermove." "I know." "You want me to start the removal proceedings?" Dominic considered. "Not yet. I want to understand the full scope first, find out who he's been talking to, how long this has been in motion, and what else he's touched that I haven't looked at." "That could take weeks." "Then start today." He got in the car. He rode back to the estate in silence, watching the city pass, and thought about his uncle, a man he had tolerated for 3 decades, a man his mother had loved in the uncritical way she loved people who were difficult, finding in them the potential she believed everyone carried. He thought about what it would feel like to tell her what Leon had tried to do. He thought about the fact that he couldn't tell her, that he would never be able to tell her, that this was the permanent, unresolvable tax on grief, the things you keep accumulating that you cannot deliver to the person who most needs to know them. He was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. He came home to find Claire in the kitchen with Margaret, and the specific quality of the silence between them when he walked in told him they'd been talking about him. He was too tired to be irritated by it. "The motion was invalidated," he said. "The center is protected." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Claire set down the cup she was holding and looked at him with an expression he was still learning to read, direct, warm, without performance. "Good," she said. "You're the reason we found it in time," he said. He was not a man who delivered statements like that easily, and the words had a slightly over-careful quality, like something carried with both hands. "I want you to know that." She nodded once. She didn't make it into more than it was, which he was starting to understand was one of the most consistent things about her. He went upstairs. He showered. He changed clothes and sat on the edge of the bed for a while looking at the floor. And when he heard her footsteps in the hall pass his door without stopping, he felt, and recognized this time, without pretending he didn't, the specific shape of disappointment. He stood up. He opened the door. She was at the end of the hall, almost to the stairs. She stopped when she heard the door and turned. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Not the dining room table." He meant something different, and she understood it. "All right," she said. They ate in the kitchen, casual, late, Margaret long since gone to her quarters, with the kind of conversation that happens when two careful people decide, simultaneously and without announcing it, to stop being quite so careful. She told him about her father's early years, the company built from a single contract and 40 years of stubborn incrementalism. He told her haltingly about his mother's habit of leaving handwritten notes in his coat pockets that he would find days later. She talked about a summer she'd spent in Bolivia at 19, building water filtration systems with a nonprofit, and how that summer had turned into the foundational architecture of everything she cared about afterward. He talked about his first year running the business alone after his mother died, the specific texture of that year, the way decisions had felt like moving through concrete. He had not talked about that year to anyone. Not to Margaret, not to his attorney, not once, in 11 years. He wasn't sure afterward why he'd done it now. Something about the way she listened, not leaning forward, not performing engagement, just present, her eyes level, her coffee going slightly cold because she kept forgetting to drink it while he was talking. "She would have liked you," he said, at the end of it. He was looking at the table when he said it. Claire was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about her," she said. He did. For an hour he told her about Eleanor Valliere, her laugh, her piano playing, her refusal to condescend to anyone, her habit of writing strongly worded letters to local politicians about funding for public libraries, the way she had run the education center with the stubborn, non-negotiable belief that every child's potential was worth an adult's sustained effort. He talked and Claire listened, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the November night had gone full dark and cold. When he finished, there was a silence that was not uncomfortable. The kind that happens when something real has been set down on a table between two people and neither of them needs to immediately process it out loud. "She volunteered at hospitals," Claire said, quietly. Not a question. "In her last 2 years, yes. She said the company she kept there was better than anywhere else." He looked up. She talked about a girl, a teenager who used to come read to patients in the summer. She said the girl asked better questions than most adults. Claire went very still. The stillness was different from her usual stillness. This one had something underneath it, a kind of slow internal seismic event. St. Raphael's, Claire said, in Queens. He watched her. The summer I was 17. Her voice had changed. Not broken. She was not someone who broke easily, but different in its quality, the way a room sounds different when you open a window. I used to go on Thursday afternoons. There was a woman in room 14 who asked me to read Edith Wharton to her, which I had absolutely no context for at 17, and I read it anyway because she made it sound like the most important thing in the world. She stopped. She pressed her lips together briefly. She never told me her name. I asked once and she smiled and said names were for people who were afraid of being forgotten. The kitchen was completely quiet. Dominic sat across from his wife and felt the specific, disorienting vertigo of a coincidence so precise it doesn't feel like one. His mother had said that. Names are for people afraid of being forgotten. He had heard that exact phrase, in that exact cadence, and had been repeating it to himself for 11 years, without knowing there was a 17-year-old girl who had also been carrying it. She was my mother, he said. Claire looked at him. Something moved across her face, not shock exactly. More like the feeling of a door opening into a room you somehow already knew the shape of. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. I didn't know, Claire said. I know. I didn't. When I came here, when I agreed to the marriage, I had no idea that she... I know, he said again, gently. The word came out gently, which was unusual for him. She pressed her hand flat on the table, fingers spread. He watched her process it. The orderly, internal architecture of a woman who is feeling something large and working out how to stand inside it. She talked about her son, Claire said. She talked about him the way people talk about their best work, proudly. But also, she paused, worried. She said he was learning to mistake control for safety. She said she hoped someone would show him the difference. Dominic said nothing. He was looking at the table. I think, Claire said carefully, she would be frustrated with me for not figuring this out sooner. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. She would be frustrated with both of us, he said. That night, for the first time since the wedding, he didn't hear her arrange herself on the sofa. He was already asleep, in the particular way you sleep after something has released from you, long and deep, and without his usual vigilance. What he didn't know was that Claire lay awake for a long time on the sofa, looking at the ceiling. She was thinking about the nonprofit offer from Boston. It had come 3 weeks ago in a letter, a real one, on paper, from the executive director of a foundation she had worked with before her father's financial collapse. The organization was expanding. They wanted her to run the Boston office. The salary was more than she had ever made. The work was exactly what she had spent 10 years building expertise for. She had not told Dominic. She had not told Margaret. She had put the letter in the inside pocket of her coat and carried it around for 23 days while she waited to understand what she was waiting for. She understood now. She was waiting to see if the thing she thought was growing between them was real, or if it was the particular trick loneliness plays on people in close quarters. She had been here 6 weeks. She had come here on the understanding that this was a contract, not a marriage. The man across the room had told her, on her wedding night, in specific and unambiguous terms, that she would not have him. The fact that things had shifted, that dinners had become real conversations, that he had told her about his mother, that he had looked at her across a kitchen table in a way that meant something, none of that changed the foundational terms. He had not said they'd changed. He had not offered anything different. He had opened up, yes, but opening up and choosing someone are not the same thing, and she was not going to build a life around the difference. She was too old for that. Not in years, but in the specific way that certain experiences age you past your calendar. She made the decision quietly, in the dark, with her coat hanging on the hook by the door and the letter still in its pocket. She would write back in the morning. She would not tell him she was leaving until it was settled. She was not cruel enough to put him in the position of a conversation he hadn't asked for, and she was not foolish enough to stay for a softening of the eyes and 2 hours of kitchen conversation and a story about a dead woman who had, improbably, known them both. She would leave cleanly. She would leave without damage. She was very good at not causing damage on her way out. She fell asleep telling herself that. What happened the next morning very nearly changed the plan. He came downstairs before she did, which was unusual, and she found him at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, writing something longhand. He looked up when she came in, and there was something different in his face, something she didn't have a category for yet, an openness that sat uneasily on the architecture of a man more comfortable with closed doors. "I want to show you something," he said. He drove her to the education center at 10 in the morning. She had known it existed. She'd read about it when researching the Valliere family before the marriage, but she hadn't seen it. It was in the Bronx, a converted warehouse on a block that had been transitioning between neglected and renewed for 20 years, and inside it smelled like dry erase markers and carpet cleaner, and the particular scent of an institution that is heavily used by people who need it. There were 40 children in the reading program. A vocational training cohort for adults met 3 times a week. On Saturday mornings, a volunteer lawyer ran a free legal clinic in the back room. Eleanor Valliere's photograph was on the wall in the main hall. Simple frame, no gilding. She was laughing in it, which was correct. Claire stood in front of it for a long time. "This is what she built," Dominic said from beside her. "Yes. I've been funding it, but I don't come here enough." He said it the way he said things that cost him something, flatly, without softening. That was wrong. She looked at him. "I want to expand it," he said. "More programs, better facilities. I have the resources. I've always had the resources. He stopped. "I kept my distance from it because every time I came here, I missed her." "And now?" Claire said. He looked at the photograph of his mother. "Now I think keeping my distance was an insult to what she built. She wouldn't have wanted the place maintained at a distance. She would have wanted it grown." They walked through the center for 2 hours. He talked to the program director. She talked to 3 of the kids in the reading program and 1 of the adult literacy students, a woman in her 50s named Dora, who was learning to read at the same time as her granddaughter, and described this as the most competitive thing she had ever done. Claire laughed. The real one, the one she was slightly embarrassed by. Dominic watched it happen and felt something straightforward and devastating. He was in love with his wife. He understood it in the education center, in front of a bulletin board covered in children's drawings, while his wife laughed with a woman named Dora. And the understanding arrived with the particular lack of gentleness that real things tend to arrive with. Not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, the full weight of it, no question and no retreat. He did not say anything. He was not ready to say anything. He needed to work out what to do with something this size, and he was a man who thought before he moved, always. He thought he had time. He didn't. Leon called him that evening, not a conciliatory call, not the careful opening move of a man recalibrating his position. This was something different. Leon's voice had a flatness in it, the particular flatness of someone who has absorbed a hit and decided, in the space between receiving it and responding, to stop playing the version of the game that involves pretense. "I need you to hear something," Leon said. "I'm listening." "Your wife." A pause. "She has been in contact with a foundation in Boston. They've offered her the executive director position. I have it from the foundation's administrative board. 3 members, 2 of whom I've known for 15 years. Another pause, longer. "She applied, Dominic, 4 weeks ago. Before the board meeting, before any of the—" He seemed to choose the next word carefully. "Warming." Dominic said nothing. "She came into this marriage with an exit strategy," Leon said. "I'm telling you this because, whatever else you think of me, I am still family. And I do not want to watch you make the mistake of confusing someone's performance of warmth with actual loyalty." The line was quiet. "I think you should take a minute to consider who actually has your interests. Don't call me again tonight," Dominic said. He hung up. He sat in his study for a long time. He sat with the specific quality of a man who has been handed information he cannot yet organize. Not because it's complex, but because the feeling underneath it is. And he has not had enough practice with this particular feeling to move through it quickly. The feeling was not anger, though anger was the form it was taking. The feeling was the bottom dropping out of something. The feeling was reaching for a handhold and finding air. 4 weeks ago. Before the board meeting, before the dinner, before his mother's room, before the education center that morning. Before Dora and the real laugh, and the understanding that arrived in front of a bulletin board. Before all of it, she had already been planning to leave. He stood up. He sat down again. He pressed his hands flat on his desk the way she had pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table the night before, and he stared at his own knuckles and tried to breathe through the cold, specific discomfort of a man who has just been shown evidence that the one thing he let himself want is also the one thing that was already leaving. He thought, Leon could be lying. He thought, Leon could have sources. He thought, she never told me. He thought, she was under no obligation to tell me. He thought, I told her my mother was afraid of being forgotten. I told her about the year I spent in concrete. I have never told anyone those things. He stood up. He went into the hallway. He stood outside the library door. Inside, he could hear faintly the scratch of a pen. She was writing something. He pushed the door open. She was at the desk, paper in front of her, and when she looked up, her face was open and unsuspecting in a way that made everything worse. Behind her on the desk, just visible at the edge, the letterhead of the Boston Foundation caught the lamplight. He saw it. She saw him see it. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the kind they'd been building, the warm, habitable kind, but the other kind. The kind with edges. Leon called me, he said. Something shifted in her face. Not guilt exactly. More like the look of a person watching something they'd hoped to control slip past the point of management. Sit down, she said. I'd rather stand. She set down the pen. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at him with the steadiness he needed suddenly to crack. When did you apply? He said. 4 weeks ago. Flat. True. No softening. Before this board meeting. Yes. Before... He stopped. He pressed his jaw tight. He looked at the window, the dark glass, his own reflection in it. Were any of it real? He turned back. The room, my mother's room. The conversation last night about... He stopped again. He almost never stopped in the middle of a sentence, and each time it happened felt like a small structural failure he couldn't afford. All of it was real, she said. Then why? Because real doesn't mean permanent. Her voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it, not anger, not quite, but the near twin of it. The feeling of a woman who has been misread in a specific way that she has been misread before and has grown tired of explaining. You told me on our wedding night that I would never have you. You were clear. You were honest. I respected that. I made a plan for my life inside the terms you set. She paused. If the terms changed, Dominic, I needed you to tell me. I was working toward telling you. I didn't know that. The room was very quiet. He looked at her. She looked at him. Two people who had, in the space of 6 weeks, built something real out of material that was supposed to be temporary, standing on opposite sides of a desk, with the evidence of her departure visible between them. Don't go, he said. It came out wrong. Not the way he meant it. He meant something larger and more specific than 2 words could carry. Something about the photograph on his mother's wall and the chrysanthemum in the hall, and Dora and her granddaughter, and the whole architecture of the last 6 weeks. But 2 words were what he had standing in the doorway of his library at 10 at night with his uncle's phone call still ringing in his chest. She looked at him for a long moment. I need to think, she said. He nodded. Once. He went back to his study. He closed the door. He did not pour scotch. He did not pick up the phone. He sat in the dark with his hands on his knees and stared at the wall and understood, completely, that he had no leverage here. He could not demand. He could not negotiate. He could not deploy the tools that had served him in every other high-stakes situation of his adult life. All he had was the truth, and he had waited too long to use it, and she had made a reasonable decision in the absence of information he should have given her, and the fact that it was reasonable made it so much worse than if it had been a betrayal. At midnight, he heard her footsteps on the stairs. In the morning, he found 1 suitcase missing from the hall closet. Her wedding ring was on the kitchen counter beside a handwritten letter, small, controlled handwriting, the pen pressing harder in certain places. And the house had the particular quality of silence that means someone has already left it, even if their body is technically still on the grounds, even if the taxi isn't coming until 6. He picked up the letter. He read it standing at the kitchen counter in his shirt from the night before, and every word was honest, and every word was fair, and every word was the considered language of a woman who had decided, carefully and without cruelty, that she was worth more than the scraps of a man who couldn't say the thing out loud until it was already too late. The last line was this: "I hope you find a way to live in the rooms you've been avoiding. I think you're closer than you know." He set the letter down. He stood in the kitchen of his estate. This man who had ordered rooms, ordered silence, ordered his grief into manageable geometry, and felt the full, unmedicated weight of what it costs to finally let something matter and then watch it walk toward the door. He was not going to let her go. He understood that with the same clarity, the same total bodily certainty with which you understand that a building is on fire. He picked up his keys. He was in the car before he had a plan. That was not how Dominic Valliere operated. He was a man who thought before he moved, always, who mapped consequence before action, who had never once in his adult professional life walked into a room without knowing his exit. He had built an empire on the discipline of that habit. He had kept himself intact for 11 years on the same principle. He had his keys and his shirt from yesterday, and no plan, and he was already at the end of the estate driveway turning toward the city. He called Margaret. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant she already knew. "She left at 5:40, Margaret said, before he could speak. "Taxi. One bag. Which airport?" A pause. "She mentioned JFK to Rosario last night, International Terminal. The Boston flight." "Not Boston," Margaret said. "The Foundation's headquarters are in Boston, but their intake process starts in London. There's a 9:15 connection." He looked at the clock on the dashboard. 6:18. "Margaret." "Go," she said. He drove. The city was still in its early morning state. Not empty, never empty, but thinner, the streets running with the people who exist in New York before 8 a.m. The delivery trucks, and the night shift workers, and the runners, and the cabs carrying people to airports for lives that were already decided. He drove with the specific controlled aggression of a man who has stopped performing composure because there is no one in the car to perform it for. He thought about the letter, the specific weight of the last line. "I hope you find a way to live in the rooms you've been avoiding." He thought about the chrysanthemum in the hall that she had not taken with her. He thought about the fact that she had made her bed on the sofa, had actually straightened the blanket and folded it before she left. He pressed the accelerator. The Van Wyck was moving, barely. He took surface streets, a decision that required knowing the city's arterial logic, the way you know it when you have driven it for 20 years. And he moved through it with the focused efficiency of a man who has converted everything he is feeling into forward motion, because forward motion is the only acceptable container for it right now. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Leon. He rejected the call. It rang again immediately. He rejected it again. A text came through. He didn't read it. Then another. His attorney's number. He answered that one on speaker. "Leon has called an emergency board session," his attorney said. "This morning, 8:30. He's claiming the amendment challenge was procedurally invalid, and he's bringing 3 new board members. He added to the supplementary roll last quarter. I'm just seeing this now. There may be grounds to..." "Handle it," Dominic said. "Dominic, if you're not in that room, handle it. You have full authority to act on my behalf. Do whatever you need to do." Silence on the line. His attorney had worked for him for 9 years and had learned the specific register of Dominic's voice that meant this discussion is over. "All right," he said. Dominic hung up. He was on the Belt Parkway now. 8 lanes of morning traffic, and he was moving through it like a man who has decided that consequences are a tomorrow problem. He thought about Leon in a boardroom at 8:30 with his 3 supplementary members and his amended procedural argument. He thought about his mother's education center. He thought about what it would cost to let Leon do what Leon was going to do while Dominic was on a highway chasing a woman to an airport. He pressed the accelerator harder. The education center would survive. He had the amendment on file, his attorney was already moving, and Leon's supplementary members were going to run into the same legal wall they'd hit 4 days ago, except this time with a fully prepared attorney holding the door closed. Leon was not going to win this morning, but even if he did, even if the worst happened, even if Dominic lost the building and the program and every brick his mother had laid, he could rebuild it. Resources could be rebuilt. Organizations could be rebuilt. He had rebuilt things before. He could not rebuild this. Understood that with the particular clarity that arrives, sometimes, when the noise of careful management finally drops away and you're left with the simple geometry of what actually matters. JFK appeared ahead of him in the early morning gray, the looming infrastructure of it, the signs directing streams of vehicles toward their specific terminals. He followed the signs for international departures and pulled into the first available space in the drop-off zone and got out of the car at a pace that was not quite running. The terminal was already moving at its morning volume, that specific, dense, purposeful movement of people who are going somewhere and know exactly how much time they have left. He went through the doors and scanned the departures board and found the 9:15 London Heathrow and the check-in counter and moved. He found her in the security line. She was 40 feet ahead of him, one bag over her shoulder, her dark coat, her hair down, moving with the unhurried forward pace of a woman who has made her decision and is living inside it. She hadn't seen him. She was looking at her boarding pass. He said her name, not loud, not the way people shout in airports and movies, with the echo and the turned heads. He said it at normal volume, the way you say someone's name when you are close enough that it only needs to reach them. She stopped. The line moved around her. People adjusted, went past, did the fluid urban choreography of navigating a stationary obstacle. She stood still for a moment with her back to him. Then she turned. She looked at him, at his shirt from the night before, at the absence of a coat in November, at his face, and something moved across hers that she quickly organized back into stillness. Dominic, not a question, not surprise entirely. I need 10 minutes, he said. The line? I know. He looked at the line. He looked at her. Please. She studied him for a moment, then she stepped out of the security queue. They moved to the side near a bank of windows that looked out onto the tarmac, the gray morning, the planes, the mechanical ordinary process of things departing. She stood with her bag over her shoulder and her boarding pass in her hand, and she looked at him with the expression she wore when she was paying full attention without performing it. He had planned, in the car, that he would be organized about this, that he would present it the way he presented everything, structured, clear, in the right order. He had planned specifically not to say anything he hadn't thought through. He opened his mouth, and none of that happened. I am not good at this, he said. I want you to know I understand that. I have spent the better part of my adult life making sure that nobody could hand me something I wasn't prepared to handle, and what that means in practice is that I have gotten very efficient at not being handed things. He stopped. His jaw was tight. He made himself unclench it. You were handed something on your wedding night that I should not have handed you. I told you the terms like they were fixed, like they were facts about the world instead of walls I had built and convinced myself were load-bearing. She was listening. She was not helping him along, and he did not want her to. You asked me if any of it was real, he said. In the library. I told you yes. I meant yes. Every conversation, every dinner, the kitchen, the education center, Dora. He paused. My mother's room. He paused again, longer. I meant yes for all of it. And I should have told you sooner that the terms had changed. I knew they'd changed. I was taking time I didn't have, being careful about something I should have been brave about, and you made a rational decision in the absence of information I owed you. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to give up Boston, he said. I'm not asking you to give up any of it. I'm asking you to not go yet. I'm asking you to give me the chance to say this properly instead of in an airport at 6:30 in the morning with yesterday's shirt on. He stopped. His voice had lost its professional flatness, and what was underneath it was quieter and raw and more honest than anything she had heard from him in 6 weeks. I'm asking you to let me try. The tarmac behind her was gray. A plane was taxiing in the slow, deliberate way of enormous machines. The terminal moved around them. She looked at him for a long time. Dominic, she said, I know. You can't just, I know. He said it again, and this time it wasn't an interruption, it was an agreement. I know this is not enough. I know 2 words in an airport do not undo 6 weeks of careful management. I know. She pressed her lips together. She looked at the boarding pass in her hand. She looked back at him. Your board meeting is at 8:30, she said. He blinked. How did you... Margaret texted me at 6. A pause. She told me about Leon's emergency session. She told me you were in the car. She met his eyes. She told me she didn't think you were coming for the board meeting. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not, he said. Something shifted in her face, small, significant. That's a lot to risk, she said. Yes. For 10 minutes in an airport. For the chance at more than 10 minutes, he said. Yes. The security line moved. A child somewhere in the terminal started crying and was quickly soothed. The PA system announced a boarding call for a flight to somewhere else, someone else's departure, someone else's point of no return. She stood in front of him with the boarding pass in her hand, and he stood in front of her in yesterday's shirt, and neither of them moved. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. He watched her face do something complicated, recognition, and then a specific kind of attention, the kind that means the incoming information is relevant and she needs to process it regardless of the conversation she is currently in the middle of. She held up one finger. She answered. He stood 3 feet away and watched her listen. Her face went through several expressions quickly. Surprise, focus, something sharper. How long ago? She said into the phone. Then, is he there now? Then, don't let him leave the building. She hung up. She looked at Dominic. That was your attorney, she said. Leon showed up to the board meeting with documentation, not about the foundation. She paused. About your father. The air between them changed. Dominic was very still in the way that means the opposite of stillness inside. What documentation? He said. Financial records. From 1994. Her voice was careful, precise. Your attorney says Leon is claiming your father made an agreement with a third-party financial group before he died. A binding agreement that transferred partial operating control of Valier Capital to a holding entity that Leon now represents. She paused. Your attorney says if the documentation is legitimate, Leon has had legal standing to challenge your control of the company for 30 years. The terminal noise continued around them, oblivious, ordinary. That's not possible, Dominic said. His voice was flat, the specific flatness of controlled shock. Your attorney says he needs you in the room. He stood there with this new thing settling on top of everything else. The airport, Claire's boarding pass, yesterday's shirt, the car in the drop-off zone accumulating a ticket, and for a moment, just a moment, the machinery of his composure ran at a genuine deficit. Claire watched him. Go, she said. Claire, go. She said it with the same quiet authority she had used in the kitchen 3 weeks ago when she'd told him to sit down. Not an ending, not a dismissal, an instruction. Handle your family's business. Do what you need to do. And I'll be here, she said, simply, without drama. He looked at her. I didn't say that to make you feel better, she said. I said it because it's true. I'll be here. Now go handle your uncle before he takes your company apart. He went. He was back in the car at 6:49, on the phone with his attorney before he'd closed the door, the engine running, the city beginning to fill up around him. Talk, he said. His attorney's voice was tight. The document is a partnership agreement dated November 1994, 2 months before your father died. It transfers 15% of the operating partnership to an entity called Creston Advisory Group. Leon is named as the successor representative for Creston in a separate amendment dated 2003. My father never told me about Creston. I know. Was it legitimate, the original agreement? The signatures look authentic. The notarization is consistent with the period. If it's real, it's been sitting in whatever filing cabinet Leon had access to for 30 years, and he's chosen now, specifically now, to surface it. Dominic drove. He drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed against his jaw, thinking. Why now? He said. It wasn't a question to his attorney. It was a question to the air, because Leon had been planning this for longer than the Education Center motion. The Education Center was a preliminary move. Test Dominic's attention, test his defenses, see what he'd catch and what he'd miss. When Dominic caught it, Leon didn't retreat. He escalated. He surfaced the larger weapon. He knew I'd be distracted, Dominic said. Sir? He told me about Claire's Boston offer last night. He knew that would... Dominic stopped. He thought about Leon's phone call, the particular flatness of a man who had stopped playing the game that involves pretense, the careful phrasing. I'm telling you this because I am still family. Leon hadn't been warning him. Leon had been ensuring he was off balance when the morning came. The call wasn't family loyalty, it was a play. Get Dominic emotional, get him distracted, get him in a car chasing a woman to an airport while the boardroom filled with Leon's documentation. He felt the cold of it move through him. Not anger yet, but the thing that comes before anger. The absolute zero of understanding that someone has been working against you with precision for a long time. Pull every document we have on Creston Advisory Group, Dominic said. Every filing, every registration, every tax record. Find out when it was incorporated, by whom, and whether it has ever transacted anything in 30 years. That'll take hours. I know. Start now. He paused. And find the original partnership records from my father's estate. Everything filed between 1993 and 1995. There should be a full inventory in the probate archive. You think the document is a forgery. I think Leon has had 30 years to prepare this move, and he chose to make it the morning after I challenged him in front of the full board. I think he's smart enough to know a forged document won't survive scrutiny, but will survive long enough to create doubt, freeze assets, and generate a legal process that could run 18 months before resolution. He drove. I think he decided that if he couldn't take the education center, he'd try to take the company. His attorney was quiet for a beat. If he can demonstrate even provisional standing, he can't. Not if we move first. Dominic turned onto the expressway. File for emergency injunctive relief against any action taken under the Creston Agreement pending forensic document authentication. File it today, before the board meeting is over. I want that process started before Leon can claim a single procedural step. You'll need to be physically present to authorize. I'm 20 minutes out. He drove those 20 minutes with a specific, cold focus, the kind he was good at, the kind that had served him for 20 years. He thought through the legal geography of what Leon was attempting with the methodical, unsentimental precision of a man mapping a battlefield. He identified the choke points. He identified his own leverage. He identified the one assumption Leon's entire strategy depended on. Leon assumed Dominic's attention would be divided. Leon was wrong. Leon had made him more focused, not less. Because the thing about having something worth protecting, something real, finally, worth protecting, was that it didn't divide you. It concentrated you. It gave the efficiency of your care a target, and a man with a target was considerably more dangerous than a man operating on pure professional discipline alone. He arrived at the Valier Capitol building at 7:22. He went through the lobby without stopping. He went up in the elevator with his attorney, who met him in the lobby and was already talking before the doors closed. The boardroom had 7 people in it when he walked in. Leon was at the head of the table, not his position, not his table, with the Creston document spread before him and the expression of a man who has been waiting for this moment long enough to savor its arrival. 2 of his supplementary board members were beside him. The 4 remaining members, Dominic's people, in the sense that they were professionals who had aligned with competence over 30 years, were on the opposite side of the table, wearing the careful expressions of people who have been presented with a surprising document and are reserving judgment. Dominic walked to his chair and sat down. He looked at the documents on the table. He looked at Leon. "Interesting morning," he said. Leon leaned back. "I think the board deserves to understand the full picture of the company's founding partnership structure." "I agree." Dominic folded his hands on the table. "Which is why my attorney is filing for forensic authentication of those documents right now." He let that sit for a moment. "We'll have results within 2 weeks. In the meantime, no action can be taken under any agreement pending authentication. Board members, you'll receive the injunction notice within the hour." Leon's jaw tightened, just barely. "You're not in a position to—" Creston Advisory Group was incorporated in Delaware in October 2003, Dominic said. 9 years after the date on that partnership agreement. He watched Leon's face. "My father could not have entered a partnership with an entity that didn't exist yet. Whatever that document says, it cannot predate the incorporation of the company it references." He paused. "Unless the document has been altered." The room was completely still. One of Leon's supplementary members turned slightly to look at the document in front of him. Leon said nothing. He was still. The absolute stillness of a man processing the specific sensation of a trap closing. "I had 2 hours in the car," Dominic said evenly. "My attorney had access to the Delaware Business Registry." He picked up his water glass and set it down again. Did you think I wouldn't check the founding date, Leon? The silence stretched. The board meeting is adjourned, Dominic said. My attorney will be in contact with each of you individually about the procedural questions that need to be addressed before we meet again. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at his uncle for a moment. This man he had tolerated for 3 decades. This man who had loved his mother enough to attend her funeral and then spent the years afterward methodically trying to dismantle what she'd built, and felt something very quiet and very final settle in his chest. You should have a conversation with your own attorney, Leon, he said. Today. He left the room. His attorney followed him into the hallway and started talking immediately. Next steps, filings, the board members he needed to contact directly before Leon could reapproach them. Dominic listened with part of his attention, and with the other part, he was thinking about Claire standing in the international terminal with her boarding pass in her hand, watching him go. I'll be here, she had said. He needed to know if that was still true. He got back in the car at 9:03. He called Margaret. She's still at the airport, Margaret said. She texted me 20 minutes ago. He released a breath he hadn't registered holding. Is she at the gate? She said she was getting coffee. He was already moving. The second drive to JFK had a different quality. The first had been pure forward motion, the conversion of feeling into speed. This one had something underneath it, a kind of careful, concentrated fragility, like carrying something at full speed and knowing that the speed is necessary, but the thing you're carrying requires you not to drop it. He thought about what he needed to say. Not the airport version, the abbreviated, desperate, insufficient version he had given her an hour ago. The real version, the one that cost something. He had spent 11 years building a life that was efficient and controlled and fundamentally protected from anything that could cost him the way his mother's death had cost him. He had done it well. He had done it so well that the life itself had become a kind of loss. The rooms he wouldn't enter, the piano he wouldn't play, the conversations he wouldn't have, the person he wouldn't be because being that person required being breakable. And he had decided at 33, standing at his mother's grave, that he was finished being breakable. Claire had not broken him. She had done something more complicated and more frightening than that. She had shown him that the walls he'd built weren't protecting him from loss. They were just loss of a different kind, slower, quieter, entirely self-administered. He parked at 6:14. He went back through the terminal doors. She was at a coffee stand near the security entrance, both hands around a paper cup, looking out the window at the tarmac with the particular expression of someone who is waiting and is honest enough with themselves to know what they're waiting for. For she heard him. She turned. He walked directly to her and stopped 2 feet away and looked at her and said nothing for a moment. The board meeting, she said. Handled. Leon? Also handled. Creston was incorporated 9 years after the date on his document. The whole thing falls apart on a 3-minute database search. He paused. He got sloppy. He was too focused on the timing of his play to check the foundation of it. She looked at him. You figured that out in the car. I had time to think clearly. He held her gaze. You told me to go handle it. Something moved in her expression, small, warm. I have to say something to you, he said, and I need to say it fully this time. Not 2 words because I ran out of airport. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and brought out the wedding ring. He had picked it up from the kitchen counter before he left the estate. He had carried it for the last 3 hours without examining why too closely. You said you needed me to tell you if the terms changed. I'm telling you now, formally. They changed. He looked at the ring in his hand, then at her. They changed the night of the chrysanthemum, and I knew it, and I was careful about it for too long because being careful was what I had left, after my mother. He stopped. He pushed through the stop. After she died, I decided that nothing was going to get close enough to cost me again. And that decision held for 11 years, and it cost me anyway. Just differently. Just the kind of cost that's invisible until you're standing in an airport watching someone leave. He paused. I'm not asking you to give up what you've built. I'm not asking you to be here instead of there. I'm asking you to let me be in the conversation about where we both go next. Her hands were still around the coffee cup. That's different, she said quietly, from what you said earlier. I know, earlier I was panicking. A beat. This is what it sounds like when I'm not panicking. She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. He did not fill the silence. I read something, she said, in your mother's room, in one of the books on the shelf. She paused. There was an envelope tucked into the back cover, addressed. She looked at him. Did you know she left a letter? He went very still. No. It wasn't addressed to you. She watched his face. It said, "For the woman my son will one day need." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a small ivory envelope, slightly worn at the edges, the kind of thing that has been preserved by being kept carefully still for a long time. I found it 3 weeks ago. I've been carrying it since. He looked at the envelope. I didn't open it, she said. I thought... She paused, working something out. I thought it wasn't mine to open alone. He looked at her face. He looked at the envelope. He understood what she was saying and what she was not saying and the weight of both. He reached out. Not for the envelope. He reached out and took her hand. The first voluntary touch since their wedding night. The first one that wasn't accidental or incidental. The first one that was chosen. And he held it, her fingers and the envelope both enclosed in his. And she looked at him with the specific expression of someone watching something they had almost given up on arrive. Open it with me, he said. She turned the envelope over. She broke the seal carefully, the old paper giving without tearing, and withdrew a single folded page covered in handwriting he recognized. His mother's, the same handwriting that had appeared in coat pockets for the better part of his childhood. She unfolded it. They read it together, standing in the international terminal of John F. Kennedy Airport at 9:22 in the morning, with the second boarding call for the London flight beginning over the PA system, with the city moving around them in its ordinary, relentless way. The first line stopped them both. If you are reading this together, then my son has finally learned that the greatest courage is not letting someone love you. It is choosing to love them back. Claire's breath caught, just slightly. Dominic stood with her hand in his and his mother's letter in the space between them and felt the specific sensation of a wall that has been standing for 11 years discover, all at once, that it no longer has anything to hold back because the thing it was built to contain has already been given away, already handed over, already belonging to the woman standing next to him in yesterday's airport with a cold cup of coffee and a boarding pass she hadn't used. He looked at her. She looked at him. The PA system called the London flight again. Final boarding, and neither of them moved, and the letter trembled very slightly in the hand that held it, because the hand that held it was not quite steady, and it was not quite steady because it belonged to a man who was, for the first time in 11 years, completely and deliberately and without reservation, present. The letter had one more paragraph. Claire read it first, her eyes moving past the first line that had stopped them both, and he watched her face change as she read, not dramatically, not the way faces change in performances of emotion, but the small, specific way a face changes when it receives something true. A slight tightening around the eyes. A breath that goes out slowly and doesn't immediately come back. She handed him the page. He read it standing in the terminal with her hand still in his, the PA system having given up on the London flight announcement, the gate presumably closed now, the boarding pass in Claire's coat pocket already void. His mother had written, I spent the last years of my life learning that the rooms we lock are never empty. They fill, slowly, with everything we were afraid to feel, and eventually the door gives way whether we open it or not. I hope my son has found someone worth opening the door for. I hope, if you are reading this, that you already know you are that person. Don't let him apologize too long. He was always better at doing than saying. Hold him to the doing. Dominic folded the letter carefully along its original crease. He held it for a moment. He put it in his breast pocket, against his chest, which was where it was going to stay. He looked at Claire. She was watching him with the steady, unsentimental attention she brought to everything, not waiting for him to perform grief or relief or any of the dramatic registers the moment could have supported. Just watching him, the way you watch someone you've decided to know. The flight, he said. Is gone, she said. I know. I meant Boston, the offer. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the window, at the gray tarmac, at the planes that were other people's futures moving in their slow mechanical circuits. I'm going to call them today, she said. I'm going to tell them I need different terms. He waited. The position doesn't have to be Boston-based. The executive director role was my design anyway. I built the program framework they're implementing. I can negotiate remote leadership with quarterly site visits. She turned back to him. Or I can tell them no, I haven't decided. Don't tell them no because of me. I wasn't planning to. She picked up her coffee cup, found it cold, set it down again. I was planning to tell them no if it turned out to be the wrong thing for the work. Or yes, with different terms, if I can structure it so the work gets done properly. She looked at him. I'm very good at my job. I know, he said. I need you to actually know that, not abstractly. I need you to understand that the work is not negotiable for me. I came from a family that built something and then lost it, and I watched what that does to a person. And I decided a long time ago that I was not going to build my entire self around someone else's structure. She paused. Even if that structure is a person She stopped. He let her stop. Even then, she said. I understand that, he said. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking to be in the same life as you while you do it. She looked at him for a long moment. The terminal moved around them. The permanent busy ordinariness of a place where people arrive and depart continuously, where arrivals and departures are so constant they stop meaning anything special, except that they don't, actually. They never stop meaning something. Take me home, she said. He did. They drove back through the city in the late morning traffic. Slower now, the rush hour having moved past them, the streets returning to their mid-morning register. She sat in the passenger seat with her coat on and her bag in her lap and watched the city go past the window. He drove. They didn't talk much, and it wasn't because there was nothing to say, but because some things need a room with a door, need the particular quiet of a known space, need to be set in a place where you can sit down afterward. Margaret opened the estate door before they reached it. She looked at them, at Claire's bag, at Dominic's shirt from the night before, at the way they were walking with that particular spatial proximity that is not touching but is adjacent to touching in a way that has intent, and said nothing. She stepped back and let them in. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee and did not ask any questions, which was how Margaret expressed the full range of her deepest satisfactions. They sat at the kitchen table, the same chairs, and drank the coffee and ate the toast Margaret put in front of them without being asked, and the house settled around them in the way houses settle when the right number of people are in them. After a while, Dominic put the letter on the table between them. Not open, just on the table. Present. I want to tell you something about her, he said, that I haven't told anyone. Claire set down her cup. When she was sick, the last 6 months, she kept running the education center. She would not stop. The doctors told her to rest, and she would nod, and then drive to the Bronx and spend 4 hours in the reading program. I used to fight with her about it. He looked at the letter. I told her she was being reckless with herself. I told her she was sacrificing her health for a building full of strangers. He stopped. She told me they weren't strangers. She said she didn't understand how I'd grown up in her house and still thought people became strangers by virtue of not yet knowing them. The kitchen was quiet. She was right, he said. It cost him something to say it that plainly. You could hear the cost. I have been operating on the assumption that distance is a form of protection, and she spent her whole life showing me it was a form of loss, and I didn't understand it until he stopped. He looked at Claire directly. Until you walked into my house and started remembering the names of my staff. Claire's hands were flat on the table. She was looking at him with an expression he was going to spend a long time learning to read, open and careful at once, the way a door is open and careful when the hinges have been repaired after a long time stuck. She knew what she was doing, Claire said. Your mother, running the center until she couldn't. Yes. She wasn't being reckless. Claire paused. She was showing you, deliberately, what it looked like to choose something. He was quiet for a moment. I think I'm only understanding that now, he said. You're understanding a lot of things now. Late, he said. Not too late, she said. Simply. He looked at her across the kitchen table and felt something settle in him. Not dramatically, not with the punctuation of a man having a revelation, but the way things settle when they are finally in their right place after a long time of being slightly wrong. Quiet, correct, without fanfare. I need to deal with Leon today, he said. I know. It won't be easy. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. He's my mother's brother's son. She loved him. In the specific way she loved difficult people, with her eyes open and her patience long. He pressed his thumb along the edge of the letter. I don't want to do to him what he tried to do to me. Claire watched him. "What do you want to do?" she asked. He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to think about things that mattered. "I want him out of the company, fully. But I want it done in a way that isn't just punishment." He paused. He is 61 years old, and he has spent 30 years operating in the shadow of a business his family built, and never having been handed the thing he thought he was owed. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it well enough that I don't want to end it with a detonation. What does that look like? A separation agreement. Full buyout of any legitimate stake he holds. A clean exit with terms he can live with. He paused. And the education center. I want to name him to the foundation's advisory board. Not as power, as responsibility. He looked at Claire. I want him to have to show up for it. I want him to sit in that building once a month and look at what his attempt to liquidate it actually was. Claire considered this. That's either very wise or very cruel. I think it's both, he said, which is probably correct. She looked at him for a moment, then, very quietly, Your mother would agree with you. He stood. He picked up the letter and put it back in his breast pocket. He picked up his phone and dialed his attorney and walked toward his study. And as he crossed the kitchen doorway, he stopped without entirely meaning to and turned back. Claire was sitting at the table with her coffee, watching him go. I'll be an hour, he said. I'll be here, she said. Again, with the same simple certainty. As if it were the easiest thing in the world to say, which for her, he understood now, it was. It was the easiest thing in the world because she meant it completely, and she only ever said things she meant completely. He went to make the call. It took 3 hours, not one. Leon didn't take the first call. He took the second, on his attorney's advice, in the particular tone of a man who has assessed the field and understands the position he is in but has not yet decided how to hold his face while accepting it. Dominic spoke for a long time. He laid out the forensic authentication timeline, the injunctive filing, the incorporation date discrepancy, and the specific legal exposure Leon was facing for presenting a fraudulent document to a corporate board. He did it without heat, without the specific cruelty that the situation could have supported. He did it as a man presenting facts to another man who already knows the facts and needs to hear them said aloud in order to understand what comes next. Then he made the offer. Silence on the line. A long silence. The kind that contains actual thought, actual calculation, the real weight of a decision being made. The advisory board, Leon said finally. His voice was different. The smoothness was gone, the practiced warmth. What was underneath it was older and more tired, and Dominic thought more honest than anything Leon had shown him in 30 years. Yes, Dominic said. Eleanor's foundation. Yes. Another silence. She would find that funny. She would find it exactly right, Dominic said, which is different. A long beat. Send me the separation terms, Leon said. Today, Dominic said. He hung up and sat for a moment in his study with the phone in his hand and the particular quality of silence that follows the closing of something that has been open for a very long time. He thought about his mother, about her patience with difficult people, her long view of what people were capable of when given the right kind of accountability. He thought about whether he had done this right or whether he had done it the way she would have done it. He thought they were probably the same thing. He went back to the kitchen. Claire was not there. He found her in the east wing, in his mother's room, sitting in the chair by the window. The door was open. She wasn't doing anything, not reading, not writing, just sitting in the afternoon light with her hands in her lap, the way she'd described doing every Sunday. Just being present in a space so it didn't forget what presence felt like. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. Done? She asked. He's taking the terms. She nodded. She looked back at the window. The winter garden was visible through the glass, bare, geometric, the kind of order that comes from nature being patiently managed. The roses his mother had planted along the south wall were dormant, cut back for the season, but the structure was there. The roots were there. In 5 months they would be white and heavy, and exactly what they'd always been. He walked into the room. He sat in the chair across from hers, not his mother's chair, the one beside the window that had always been the secondary chair, the one for visitors, and he looked at his mother's room the way he hadn't allowed himself to look at it in 11 years. the framed photograph, the books on the shelf, the piano playing awards from her 20s that she'd kept without pride, just as evidence that she had once been young and had taken lessons seriously enough to win something. He looked at the white roses in the vase. 3 days old now, still open, still white. "I need to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. "The foundation in Boston, call them today. With the new terms, the remote structure, the quarterly visits. Don't let that sit." She was quiet for a moment. "You're sure? The work is not negotiable for you. You told me that." He looked at her steadily. "I meant what I said at the airport. I'm not asking you to stop. The education center. I want you involved in the expansion, formally, as a partner in it. You found the amendment, you know the legal structure, you care about it for the right reasons." He paused. "That's in New York. Boston is Boston. We figure out the geography." She looked at him with the focused attention of someone checking a thing for honesty and finding it. "You're not doing this to make me stay," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a clarifying question. "No," he said. "I'm doing it because it's right. The center needs what you bring to it, and you need work that is yours, not an extension of mine." He paused. "Those two things are both true at the same time." She was quiet. "All right," she said. "All right, you'll call them?" "All right to all of it." She held his gaze. "But I need you to understand that this is a negotiation, not me following your plan." "I know. And if the terms don't work, I'll tell you that." "I expect you to." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she reached over and picked up his mother's journal from the side table. Not Claire's journal, Eleanor's, which Margaret had apparently placed there at some point, and set it in her lap with her hands resting on the cover. "She wrote in here every Sunday, too," Claire said. "Margaret told me. She kept it for the last 8 years of her life." "I didn't know she kept a journal." "No." Claire looked at the cover. "I think that was intentional. Some things she wrote for herself." She paused. "I haven't read it. I found it 2 weeks ago, and I put it here, and I've been leaving it alone." He looked at the journal. "I think we should read it together," Claire said. "Not today, but at some point, when it feels right." She looked up. "She left a letter for the woman you'd need. She left a room for someone to tend. I think she left a journal for both of you." He felt the truth of that move through him. Not painfully, not the way grief usually moved, but with the quieter, weightier sensation of something being returned to him that he hadn't known was still out there. "Yes," he said. "At some point." They sat in the room for a while in the late afternoon light, not talking, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that two people only have when they have decided, without announcing the decision, that they are in the same place and do not need to fill the space to prove it. Eventually, Claire called Boston. She made the call from the library, the door half open, and he did not listen, but he could hear the register of her voice through the wall. Clear, direct, unhurried. The voice of a woman who knows the value of what she's offering and is not inclined to apologize for it. The call lasted 40 minutes. He spent it at his desk, going through the separation agreement terms with his attorney via email. And when she appeared in his study doorway afterward, her face was composed and slightly tired in the way of someone who has just done a piece of work that required full concentration. "They agreed," she said. "Remote director, quarterly visits, full autonomy over program design." She paused. "And they're expanding the New York satellite program, which means I'll be interfacing with the education center model we're building here anyway." He looked at her. "That worked out cleanly." "I'm very good at negotiations," she said. "You know this already. You watched me do it to you." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You didn't do it to me. You did it in a room I was also in. There's a difference." She looked at him for a beat. Then she smiled. Not the polite social smile she deployed in public. Not the warm but managed smile she used with the staff. But the real one. The one she was slightly embarrassed by. The one that appeared when something caught her genuinely, and she hadn't had time to present it differently. It was the same smile Eleanor had described. In a coat pocket note he hadn't read until 11 years after the fact. "There is a girl here who laughs at things and then looks embarrassed about it, as if she's spent too long learning that unguarded things get taken. I hope she stops being embarrassed." The laugh is the best part. He had not told Claire that. He decided to tell her. He got up from the desk and walked to where she was standing in the doorway and said, "My mother wrote about your laugh." She went still. In the coat pocket notes. The ones she left for me. He looked at her face. She described it exactly, and she said she hoped you'd stop being embarrassed about it. Claire stood in the doorway of his study and looked at him and did not say anything for a long moment. Her eyes were bright. Not crying, she was not someone who cried easily, he was learning, but bright with the specific quality of eyes that are working very hard to hold what they're full of. She wrote that, Claire said. Yes. About me. About a girl who read Edith Wharton out loud to a woman she didn't know in a hospital in Queens. He paused. The same girl. Claire pressed her hand flat against the door frame. She breathed through her nose slowly. She looked at the ceiling briefly and then back at him with an expression that was composed and ruined at the same time, in the specific way of people who have just received something they've needed for a long time without knowing they needed it. She knew, Claire said. Didn't she? She knew before any of us. I think so, he said. Yes. She nodded once. She pressed her lips together briefly. Then she said quietly, I'm going to go sit in her room for a little while. Okay. You should come, she said. Later. I will, he said. She went. He stood in the doorway of his study and listened to her footsteps down the hall and the quiet sound of the east wing door opening and the house settling around it, and he felt, in the specific room of his chest that had been locked for 11 years and was now, slowly, being furnished, the particular quality of warmth that is not happiness exactly, but is the precondition for it. The ground that happiness requires, the sense that the place you are standing is solid and real and chosen. He went back to his desk. He finished the separation agreement. He sent it to Leon's attorney and then to his own, and he sat for a moment looking at the sent email with the particular satisfaction of a closed thing. Not triumphant, not relieved, just finished. Leon would sign. Leon would show up to the foundation board meetings and sit in Eleanor's education center once a month and feel whatever he needed to feel about it. That was not Dominic's project anymore. What Leon did with his own accounting was Leon's. Dominic's project was something else. He called the education center director in the Bronx at 4 o'clock. I want to talk about expansion, he said. Specifically, I want to understand what the program needs that it doesn't currently have. Not what I think it needs. What the people in the building tell you they need. The director, a woman named Patricia, who had run the center for 7 years and had the specific weariness of someone who has been doing critical work with chronic under-resourcing for a long time, was quiet for a moment. Then she started talking. He listened for an hour. He took notes. He had not taken notes on a conversation like this in 11 years. He had resources, and he had deployed them at the center dutifully, at the appropriate intervals via the appropriate channels, in the way that a man funds something he loves without allowing himself to love it too directly. He understood now what that had cost the center, not financially, but in the specific texture of engagement that organizations like this one needed to actually live. Money was not the same as presence. His mother had known that. She had demonstrated it until the last possible moment. He was going to demonstrate it differently. Not the same way. He was not Eleanor, and the version of presence that was right for him would be shaped by who he was, not who she was. But presence. Real, sustained, accountable presence. At 5:30, Margaret appeared in his doorway with her coat on, which meant she was done for the day, which happened rarely enough that he always registered it. Going home? He said. I'm 68, she said. My knees hurt, and I've had enough of this family's drama for one day. He almost smiled. Thank you, Margaret, for this morning. She looked at him steadily. I didn't do anything. You texted her. You told her I was in the car. I told her you were behaving like a person instead of a building, Margaret said, which is what she needed to know. She adjusted her coat. Don't thank me. Just keep behaving like a person. I'll try, he said. Try harder than usual, she said, and left. He sat for a moment in the quiet of his study. This room he had spent 11 years managing his life from. This room that had been the command center of a very orderly, very careful, very protected way of being alive. And looked at it as if he hadn't seen it before, which in certain ways he hadn't. Then he went to his mother's room. Claire was in the chair. She had Eleanor's journal in her hands, closed, not reading it, just holding it. The white roses on the dresser had dropped one petal, which lay on the wood beneath the vase, which meant they had about a day left. He would need to replace them on Sunday. He sat in the visitor's chair across from her. The winter light was gone now, the room holding the last of the afternoon in the way rooms do when they face west and the season is short. He should turn on the lamp. He didn't. He let the light go slowly. Patricia told me something, he said. The director. She said that the kids in the reading program, there are 3 who've been there since they were 7. They're 12 now. He paused. They've been in that program for 5 years. She said the thing that keeps them there, specifically, is that the volunteers learn their names. Claire looked at him. She said children who feel like they are known stay, he said, and children who feel like they are part of a program leave. Claire was quiet for a moment. Your mother knew that? Yes, she built the whole thing around it. He looked at the photograph on the dresser. Eleanor at some unidentified summer event, laughing, always laughing. I've been funding a building for 11 years. I think I need to start funding a practice. What does that look like? I don't know exactly. Patricia has ideas. You probably have ideas. He looked at her. I'd like to figure it out together, if you're willing. She held his gaze. I'm willing. The quarterly Boston visits. We work around them. Whatever the center needs on those weeks, we staff for it. You're not responsible for covering my neglect. It wasn't neglect, she said. It was grief that didn't know where to go. It looked like neglect from the inside of the building. Yes, she said. It did. She set the journal down on the side table. We'll fix it. The room was very quiet and almost dark. He reached over and turned on the lamp, the small one on the side table, the one that cast the low, warm light his mother had preferred to the overhead, which she'd found clinical. The room came back in amber and shadow. He looked at Claire in the lamplight, the coat she'd packed for Boston, her hair slightly undone from the day, her hands in her lap, relaxed, the specific physical ease of a woman who has made her decision and is living inside it without second-guessing it. He thought about the wedding night, the way she'd said thank you for being clear, the way she'd taken the plain wool blanket, not the decorative one, the way she'd understood without being told which things were meant to be used and which were meant to be looked at. He had been a thing meant to be looked at for 11 years. She had, quietly and without making it a project, shown him how to be used, how to be in the world in a way that left marks, in a way that meant something to the rooms you moved through and the people you moved past, and the child learning piano in a forgotten wing, and the woman named Dora reading to her granddaughter in a converted warehouse in the Bronx. I want to ask you something, he said. She waited. The wedding, he said. The ceremony. It was what it was. There were 200 people and it was a contract and I was not present for it in any way that matters. She looked at him carefully. I would like to do it again, he said. Not for anyone else. Not for the family or the board or the appearance of stability, for... He stopped. He pressed through the stop. For the record, I would like there to be a record of us choosing this, not being arranged into it. The room was very quiet. That's not a small thing you're asking, she said. No. You understand it's not the ceremony that matters. It's what's underneath it. I know, but I want the ceremony too. He looked at her directly. I want to stand somewhere and say it out loud. I want you to be able to hear me say it. I have been the kind of man who keeps the important things interior, and I want to practice being different, and I thought this might be a place to start. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the lamp seemed to settle into its warmth, long enough that the house made one of its evening sounds. A pipe somewhere, the click of the heat, the ordinary intimate sounds of a structure that shelters people. White roses, she said finally, in the garden. When they bloom, he said. May. Small, she said. Not 200 people. Margaret, Patricia from the center, your father, a few others. Dora, she said. He looked at her. Dora from the center, Claire said. Her and her granddaughter. I want them there. Yes, he said. All right. She looked at him across his mother's room in the lamplight, and her expression was the open and careful one, the hinges repaired one, and it was the most honest face he had ever seen on another person, which was the most frightening thing about it and the most necessary thing about it, both at once. Okay, she said. May. White roses. Small. Yes. She reached across the space between them. She put her hand on his, not taking it, not holding it, just placing it there, the way you place something you mean to return to. The same gesture she had made on the kitchen table the night before when the world had still been slightly different. He turned his hand over. He held hers. They sat in his mother's room in the lamplight with the white roses one day from needing to be replaced, and the journal on the side table, waiting for the right moment, and the lease of the day running out around them. Outside the window, the winter garden was bare and geometric and patient. The rose structure was there along the south wall. The canes cut back, the roots deep, the whole architecture of bloom waiting under the surface for the season to change. 5 months. May was 5 months, and the garden would be white and heavy, and exactly what it had always been, and the two people who would stand in it would be different from the two people who had stood in the estate driveway. 11 years of grief ago, and been handed a contract and called it a wedding. Different because one of them had learned, finally, that the greatest costs are not the ones taken from you. They are the ones you administer to yourself, quietly, efficiently, year after year, in the name of safety. And different because one of them had never stopped leaving doors open in the places she moved through. Not as a strategy, not as a play for anything, but because that was simply who she was. The woman who replaced the roses every Sunday, who remembered the names, who sat with strangers until they weren't strangers, who had read Edith Wharton out loud to a dying woman in a hospital in Queens, and carried the echo of it for 15 years without knowing why. Eleanor Valliere had written in a letter left in the back of a book in a locked room that the greatest courage was not letting someone love you, but choosing to love them back. She had been right. She had been right about most things and wrong about almost nothing, and she had known, in the particular way that some people know things, not mystically, not magically, but with the accumulated precision of a person who has paid attention for decades to what human beings actually need, that her son would eventually open the door. She had just left someone on the other side of it. In May, the garden was white. Not every rose. Some had taken the winter hard and come back thin, and Margaret had said plainly that they needed a proper gardener and not just Claire with pruning shears and good intentions, which was accurate. But the south wall was full and heavy, the blooms wide open in the specific way of roses in the first real warmth of the year, and the air in the garden had the quality of light that comes before summer, when the days are still gentle. They stood on the south terrace, the one Claire had cleared in her first week, now properly fitted with stone benches and the clay pots she had been adding to since November. Margaret stood to Dominic's left with her good coat and her best expression of composed satisfaction. Thomas Winslow stood beside his daughter with the particular posture of a man who has been carrying guilt for long enough that having something to be glad about feels almost unfamiliar. Patricia from the Education Center stood with Dora, who was wearing a red hat and had brought her granddaughter, who was 9 and was more interested in the roses than the ceremony, which was correct. There were 11 people in total. Dominic had written what he wanted to say. Not vows in the traditional sense. He was not a man who worked well from other people's templates, but words he had actually meant, which he had written and rewritten for 2 weeks, and had finally gotten down to their honest shape. He had practiced saying them to himself in his study at 6 in the morning, and had discovered that the third sentence made his voice do something he couldn't fully control, which he had decided to let happen. He said them. He said that he had built his life around the certainty that loss was the cost of love, and that the correct response to that cost was to stop engaging in the transaction. He said that she had not argued with that certainty. She had just lived in proximity to it until it became impossible to maintain. He said that he was not a man who was going to be easy to be married to, that he would be controlled when he should be open and efficient, when he should be present, and he would need to be told when he was doing those things. He said that he was asking her to tell him. He said that he was asking for her patience as a specific and valued thing, not as an assumption. He said that he had found his mother's notes in his coat pockets for the whole of his childhood, and he had thought he understood what they meant until he found them again after she was gone, and the meaning had shifted into something larger and more personal than he had words for. And what he understood now was that she had been writing to him about this, about the specific and daily practice of choosing to be in the world with someone rather than alongside them. He said, "I am choosing to be in the world with you, not alongside, in." His voice did the thing on the third sentence. He let it. Claire looked at him through it. She did not look away and she did not fill the space, and when it was her turn, she said what she had to say, which was shorter and more direct because that was how she worked. She said, I came here on a contract and I stayed for reasons that had nothing to do with the contract. I stayed because the rooms needed tending and so did the person in them. I'm not here to tend you. I want to be clear about that. I'm here because I looked at you and recognized something I wanted to be near for a long time. She said, That's the whole thing, actually. That's all of it. Margaret made a sound that she would deny, if asked, was anything other than a response to the pollen. Thomas Winslow put his hand briefly over his face. Dora's granddaughter asked, at moderate volume, if they were going to kiss now, which resolved the question of what to do next. They ate lunch in the garden. Margaret and Rosario had produced an unreasonable amount of food and were visibly pleased about this. And the children ran between the rose beds, and Patricia told Thomas about the adult literacy program, and Dora corrected several things Patricia said, which Patricia accepted with the tolerance of a woman who has learned that Dora is usually right. Thomas laughed at something, a real laugh, the first real one Claire had heard from him in 2 years. And she watched him across the garden from where she was standing with Dominic, and felt something in her chest unclench that had been clenched for a very long time. Dominic stood beside her and followed her gaze to her father. He looks better, he said. He does. She paused. I think he needed to see that what happened to his company wasn't the end of something. It was she paused, the structure that made the next thing possible. He was quiet for a moment. Is that what it was? She looked up at him. Yes, she said. That's what it was. He put his arm around her shoulders. Not dramatically, not making a thing of it. Just placed it there, the way you place something you intend to keep. And she leaned into it very slightly. The way you lean into something you've been waiting for long enough that you're not going to be performative about finally having it. They stood in the garden in the May light and looked at the people moving through it, and the roses doing their annual faithful work along the south wall, and the house standing behind them in its solid, undemonstrative way. Margaret appeared at his elbow. Rosario made the cake from your mother's recipe, she said. The one with the lemon. I thought you should know before you eat it. He looked at her. I thought it was appropriate, Margaret said. She liked parties. She would have liked this one. She looked at the garden. She would have said we needed more chairs. We do need more chairs, Claire said. I'll order them this week, Dominic said. Margaret nodded with the brisk satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting 26 years for this household to require more chairs. She went back to the table. Dominic looked at the garden, at all of it, the full circumference of this afternoon, the people in it, the roses, the house, the particular quality of May light that is neither sharp nor soft, but somehow both, the kind of light that makes everything look like it has been considered. He thought about his mother, not with the ache of 11 years' practiced grief, but with the quieter, more bearable feeling of a man who has finally begun to carry his dead in the right part of himself, not in the locked rooms, not in the armored distance, but openly, in the daily fabric of doing things in the spirit of what they loved. He thought about the letter in his breast pocket. It was there, it was always going to be there, and the line about courage and choosing back. He had chosen. He was going to keep choosing. Every day, in the small and daily way that choosing actually works, not in single dramatic gestures, but in the accumulation of mornings where you get up and decide again. He had a lot of mornings left. He intended to use them. He turned to Claire. She was already looking at him, which he was learning was often the case. She had a piece of lemon cake on a plate and was holding it out to him. Your mother's recipe, she said. Apparently. He took the plate. Is it good? He said. She looked at him with the real smile, the slightly embarrassed one, the one his mother had described in a coat pocket note 40 years before either of them knew it would matter. Try it, she said, and tell me what you think. He did. It was very good. He told her so, and she laughed. That laugh, the one she'd been carrying since she was 17, the one that arrived before she could manage it. And the garden held the sound of it for a moment the way gardens hold sounds, briefly and completely, before releasing it into the ordinary May afternoon where